Almost every week in this church, we could start a sermon by asking, do things need fixing? And this week it feels especially so. I was thinking about moments in my life where something is broken and when it's fixed, and that often lands me in the care of other people who know more than I do. I'm not a real handy kind of guy around the house, and so when something is broken or leaking or on fire or needs to be fixed really quick, I often find myself in the context of a big box home improvement store, nervously wandering around the aisles, hoping that somebody will help me fix what's broken. And often the response I get is, yeah, I think we have that thing. It's over on aisle 427. Good luck. But what a difference it has made to me when someone looked me in the eyes and said, oh my gosh, that's terrible. I had the same thing happen at my place. I want you to know it's fixable. Come with me, and I'll show you how to get this done. Those two approaches feel very different to me. When I feel out of control or helpless, whether it's in the hardware store or more pressing concerns. In today's worship, we want to highlight people who take the second approach. When life feels broken or needs to be fixed, people who have said, I've seen that. I know that it's terrible, but I've also seen it be healed. Come with me. I'll show you. I asked members of the congregation and community this week to send me on Facebook or Instagram or email or however they wanted to get in touch, images where they saw possibility being brought into the world. The question I asked people was, who taught you what was possible? Can you show me where you see possibility in tangible form of a different kind of world? We got pictures of diverse groups of people dancing and children playing. We saw art and poetry, statues representing the best of who we are and the worst of who we are being taken down. Someone just sent a painting that said, smash the patriarchy. This week, we talked to members of our church who had done just the same. Our ministers and staff had a chance to sit down with Jeannie Fritz this week and ask about her efforts and her husband Ned's in conservation. One of the amazing things that Ned and Jeannie would do, instead of handing a U.S. senator or a congressperson a policy about conservation, they would take them camping in the woods and say, look what will be lost. They would help them fall in love with the soil and the trees that they could smell and taste and feel and hear. A very different approach. When I explained that to my son, who's an animal lover, that they had saved numerous species, he started to think y'all were superheroes. But something about that image of come and see, come and see. My image that I put on the little reel of images that was showing before worship, the one that stood out as a person who showed possibility to me was Mr. Rogers. I think I was especially reminded of him because of the recent film about his life, which I was very dehydrated after watching. I lost a lot of fluid. But the image that stood out in my mind of him in particular was one that I didn't know about until I was an adult. One of the things that really stands out to me about Mr. Rogers was his ability to say what was with courage, to never shy away from hard topics with kids, but also to hold up a world that could be, all in the same program. I watched some of the footage from the first week of his show in which he is taking images of a king who is against change and building a wall. The first week of Mr. Rogers' show. He then shows the children what it would look like for peace to take over that kingdom and for the walls to come down. And then that first year of the program, only 4 months after Martin Luther King was martyred, when he was shot down, Mr. Rogers invited a young black musician named Francois Clemens, who he had heard sing in a church, to play the role of a police officer on his show. Francois Clemens was uncomfortable with that at the beginning. He had seen often what policing looked like in his neighborhoods and was uncertain about how much good he could do taking on the uniform. in a children's television program. But he said yes and became the first regularly reoccurring African-American character on a children's program. And in one stunning episode that shows the kind of quiet, subversive nature of Mr. Rogers, Mr. Rogers is soaking his feet in a hot, long day in a children's pool. Francois Clemens comes by and Mr. Rogers asks him if his feet are also sore and says, "Why don't you take your shoes off and put them in the water with me?" During a time in which civil rights leaders were being assassinated and segregation was still so very prominent, and it was illegal in many places for black folk and white folk to swim together in a pool, those brown and white feet in a pool together at the same time said a lot without saying very much. When it was time for Officer Clemens to get out of the pool, what Mr. Rogers did was then offer to see if he could wash and dry his feet for him before he put his shoes back on. As a Presbyterian minister, he knew exactly what image he was evoking. And the Jesus that he followed was very present, of the teacher who would wash the feet of those he served with and for. That teacher, Jesus, I think, gets a bad rep, especially in progressive communities sometimes. If we really paid attention to that story, we might see a different kind of model of a person who could courageously call out with rage what is, and also point to a version of what could be with the kind of tangible expression of love that made people come from miles away. In the Gospels, the teacher Jesus uses this phrase a lot, "come and see." When people ask him, "What's going on? What are you doing?" he often says, "Come and see." Especially in the Gospel of John, the mystical Greek version that if anyone tells you they understand is not fully correct yet. People say, "What's going on? What are you doing?" And he responds, "Come and see." Not, "We have a workshop later. Here's a theory. I have a policy manual. Go and think about it." No, he says, "Come and see." Often what it looks like is exactly the opposite of what the power structure of the day would say. He knows exactly who is marginalized and not listened to, whose bodies are treated with violence by the state, and says, "I'm with them. Come and see. We have a dinner you can come to later, but you have to know there's Roman centurions and prostitutes there. Come and see. Come and see." But this is not the safe, naive 8-pound baby Jesus in the manger who will make all things well without being mad. This is the same teacher who curses his followers for falling asleep and not waking up. It's the same teacher who protests the injustice of his day by turning over the tables in the temple, the most sacred place they had, running in with rage, calling people names, protesting in the temple, and turning the tables over until they were smashed. But what an example of a person who could do both. Turn over tables in the temple in the morning and build heaven on earth at a feast in the afternoon. Being able to do both of those things is a powerful lesson, and I'm grateful for teachers who show me how to speak out against what is and how to build what can be, all in the same life, especially in difficult times. And right now, in our current moral context as Americans, it's hard to know exactly what to do. Turn the tables over or build heaven on earth? In our moral context as a people, it can feel so disappointing and disheartening and frightening for many of us. Just this week alone, listening to the most powerful human beings on the planet Earth mock those who have come forward to share stories about violence against their bodies and souls. To mock those stories feels like moral injury. It can feel so disappointing to feel like either we've made very little gain in the areas of peace and justice making that we as moral progressives or spiritual progressives thought we were building, or also in the conversations I'm having at home or with my friends, feeling more like despair or powerlessness or a lack of agency, where I say, well, if I get mad enough, I'll just tweet and he'll really hear my voice. As if that was the full extent of what we can do. It's easy to fall into a moment where we are surrounded all the time, not by what could be, but with what is. And while it's necessary to look clearly at what is and say it with courage and turn the tables over, we have to pay deep moral attention to what we surround ourselves with, because it shapes what we believe is possible. We live in human bodies, and human bodies and brains are hardwired to make meaning out of what we encounter. We're predisposed to believe before we disbelieve, and so the images and the environment and the situations and the people that we encounter form our very sense of what is possible. There's a woman, Dr. Banaji at Harvard, who did some of the real good, hard scientific work on implicit bias. She's the one who invented the implicit bias test you can take online. And she points out just how the human brain is hardwired, unfortunately, sometimes to reinforce the stereotypes and small stories we tell about ourselves. If the only images we encounter of people different than us are demeaning ones, our brain starts to think that's what is true. And it's hard to break out of a sense of what can be. She did say, however, that the good news is that if we do encounter examples and images of a different and better world, we start to believe it's possible. Which is why representation in media and school and images and religion is so important, why it matters for people of color to see examples of others in leadership in real ways, why it matters for girls to grow up seeing that there are doctors and lawyers and television programs that look a lot like them. She studies MRI scans of what happens when we see those images, and literally our capacity to imagine more can be created if we encounter what could be more often. Now, we're called to do meaning making in a universe in which change is not only possible, it's inevitable. The question at the heart of every great moral quandary, every societal transformation, every breaking free from addiction or making a relationship better, every building a church or a community or a country, every voting drive, the fundamental question is, can this change? Can we change? Can I change? Can this be different? And the answer 100% is yes, and it will be. Because change is built into the fabric of reality itself. Stars are born and die, galaxies change, climates change. Chaos looks like it's built into the foundation of every atom. And it's also possible in you. We've learned more in the past few years about the human mind and brain than we ever have, and the idea that it's fixed has been broken. Your very identity, your very brain, your neurons are plastic and elastic. You can change your mind and make new decisions and do things you never thought were possible, whether you're young or old. Possibility may be built into the fabric of who we are too. For me, the most relevant image of God, or the metaphor of God that makes sense in my life right now, is possibility. The possibility that's built into the foundation of every atom and every moment, the possibility that knows that the last story of your life isn't the only story of your life, that the last story of our nation isn't the only story of our nation. But let me tell you, in difficult moments, it's hard, even as a person whose job is to stand up and try to make people hopeful. Even in a difficult situation, it takes a whole lot of discipline in chaotic times to be people who can maintain a solid vision for what is possible, not only see it, but believe it and share it to the world so more people can see it and we can say, come and see. In the poem from Marge Piercy today, she talked about attention being love, attention being a form of prayer. And the current system of daily injustice and daily crisis seems designed to keep us from attention. There's a moral value on being able to calm and still your soul so that you can see what's worth fighting with and for, so that you can see what's worthy of your worship and attention and love. But if we are, like I have been lately, like a pinball in the machine, moving in between outer and inner crisis on a daily basis, checking the news 3,500 times a day, I have no chance to pause and give attention to my life or my community or my God or my values. And without that pause, we lose the imaginative capacity to believe that something else is possible. And we need the imaginative capacity to believe that something else is possible. I think the discipline that's called of us, if I were going to reach back to my old roots, would be testifying, witness, testimony. When I was a Baptist, people often, they rarely ever said, yeah, Jesus is great, go learn about him somewhere else. Or, oh yeah, my life has been changed, but I refuse to share that story with you. We're all on our own here. Even though there was plenty of baggage that came with that upbringing, one of the things that I really respected about that was that when something had saved or changed or healed somebody's life, they said, I want to stand up and tell you what's happened to me. I want to tell you that things can get better because it's been happening in my life. I've seen it with my own eyes, and if you come with me, you can see it too. Progressives are not always great about testifying, but boy, is it time. Sure, it's hard to hold up a vision of the world and say, I know it's hard right now, but come with me and I'll show you how it gets better. I know it's hard because almost every vision is imperfect and can be shot down in a second. I know it's hard because we're bouncing in between moral crisis to moral crisis in the sense that we're losing our ability to pause and reflect on what's real. I know it's hard when you're angry. And anger is good because it's change fuel. Don't lose your anger in difficult moments, but neither should you get lost in it. What is not the only story. Because I've seen difficult moments, as I'm sure you have. And those of you who are old enough have seen our country go through perilous moments and come back. I believe what we need is a community of people who become come and see leaders. Who look at the outrage of the world and can turn the tables over in the morning and build heaven on earth in the afternoon. Who don't believe that we have to pick one or the other as the approach to love and justice, who can smash the patriarchy and sing all in the same service. But that job is completely yours. So if you have ever experienced something that made you believe a better world is possible, now is the time to start telling somebody. If you have ever been confronted with a love so radical that it saved your life, go tell somebody about it who needs it. If you have faced despair and yet you have been surrounded by Mr. Rogers or Jeannie Fritz or Jesus or someone who said it doesn't have to be this way, then do the same for someone else. Because we need more than ever the ability to see that this and we and I and you can change until heaven on earth is very real. Be the kind of person who knows what's possible, who believes in it, and who says to others, come and see. May it be so. Amen.